Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, and this particular adventure is way overdue. I said that I would do a special review and analysis of the different relationships that are going on within the game Deltarune, especially since Chapter 2 revealed a ton of information. And I look at this game as really, in all honesty, even though we're only 2 chapters into the game out of 7 chapters, I really do see this as a masterclass in understanding how to write wonderful characters that are just full of personality and tracking all of the different relationships that really just bring this world and its story to life. Because a story lives or dies by its characters. If the characters aren't spot on, it doesn't matter what the story is, it just won't work. And you've seen this probably a lot with various television shows, movies, or books, where the premise sounds really awesome, the world seems really cool, but the characters just aren't landing. And one of the things that is necessary to writing really good characters are the relationships that they are in. And I'm not just talking about romance either. And I've talked quite a bit in the past about the geometry of love, how you can use multiple relationships far beyond a love triangle to help bring out more personality for your individual characters. In this case, what we want to look at right here is we want to look at how individual friendships and also potential romances help bring out even more for the characters in the game Deltarune. And then think about how we can use that as an example or as a model for ourselves as writers. So before I get too rambly, let me just explain what I'm going to do here. I am going to talk about just the main relationships between the kids within the game. There are so many different relationships going on here within Deltarune, in part because the story takes place in a little town. And just like any little town, hometown has little town problems. Everyone knows each other and everyone is up in each other's business. As a result, main characters Kris and Susie are connected to so many other characters, and it can get pretty overwhelming to try to look at every single relationship because honestly, since Toby does such a great job of bringing out these different characters, nearly every relationship has some sort of meaningful positive or negative influence on Kris and Susie. So rather than getting into all of those other relationships, because then I might be here for 3 to 4 hours, I'm just going to focus in on the main relationships between the kids that we see in chapters 1 and 2. And I'm going to narrow it down even further by just talking about Kris, Susie, Noelle, Ralsei, yes I am going to include Ralsei into that list, Catti, and Jockington. Now, the last 2 might seem really far out there, but there is a reason for it, which I will get into later in the video. Suffice it to say, each chapter does a great job of foreshadowing who we're going to be talking to next in the upcoming chapters. So, without any further ado, let's get into it, because otherwise I'll be here for an hour. So let's start off with Kris, and I'm going to be looking at all of these different relationships as best as I can through the lens and the understanding of each individual person. So starting off with Kris, looking at Susie. However you want to slice it, whether it be because Kris has a crush on Susie or because Susie is a kindred spirit to Kris, Kris has a lot of interest in Susie. And this is something that we get through a lot of the subtle hints going on throughout the game. Because I am a cruisy shipper, this is something that I have particularly paid attention to while I've been playing the game. How does Kris express themselves through a game where we as the player are in control of Kris, but Kris has a very distinct individual personality? Well, one of the things that we immediately see throughout the game is that if you're willing to dive deep into the dialogue, there are things that Kris brings up that Susie then responds to, because we never see Kris speak, but we see Susie speak, and if you're paying attention, you're like, wait a second, holy cow, Kris actually knows Susie. Like, for instance, in Deltarune Chapter 1, Kris knows that Susie likes worms, and so Kris offers Susie a bucket of worms if Susie won't fight Kris and Ralsei during the whole Susie-Lancer fight. So already right here, and this is just one of many little details where Kris seems to know quite a bit about Susie, either because they've been watching her from afar or have been actually way more involved in Susie's life than we have been led to believe. But in any case, Kris knows Susie. Kris enjoys being around Susie. One of the things I think is really cool is how if you play through the Neo-Spampton fight, not the weird route, but the regular pacifist route, Kris wants to be comforted by Susie. Kris wants to share experiences with Susie. Kris is willing to share moss with Susie. Kris feels a strong connection to Susie right here, and that might be because Susie is really Kris's first real friend since Azrael left for college. And this is honestly a big deal for Kris because as we see throughout the 2 chapters that we've played through thus far, well, Kris is dealing with the fact that we as the players control Kris. Kris doesn't have any real autonomy except for a few moments where Kris kind of rips away control and does things usually for the people around them, mostly being Susie. And what that then means is that Kris highly values this relationship. Susie means a lot to them, whether as a romantic interest or whether as the first real friend since Azrael left. This really means something for Kris because Susie is actually a motivation to Kris to be an individual. Because Susie in chapter 2 takes the initiative and starts learning how to act on her own, which I would believe prompts Kris really to think more about acting on their own, which is why they take such an interest in meeting with Spampton and trying to see what happens if you cut the strings. Now, going down this particular route is very easy to go down a rabbit hole of speculation and theorizing, which I intend to get to one of these days, but that's not what this video is for. So suffice it to say, Susie is an inspiration to Kris. Susie is a friend to Kris. And we see definitely how there is a back and forth going on right here. This is one of the things that I really enjoyed, that even though we don't get to see Kris speak for themselves, it's quite clear that there is a back and forth when we pay attention to the dialogue boxes. Now, the next relationship that is very interesting to note is the relationship between Kris and Noelle. This relationship, ooh boy, I don't know whether to classify this as just a healthy relationship that fell apart or ultimately a toxic relationship. And I'm not just going to focus in on what we get with the Snowgrave route, because the Snowgrave route, I personally feel, is leaning far more towards the player just driving these poor kids to horrible things. And once again, it is a rabbit hole that's very easy to get down, and woof, I'm not going to tackle it here. Instead, I want to look at what we get when we look at Kris and Noelle's conversations apart from everyone else. And this is because Noelle is just a jitterbox around everyone else. But with Kris, Noelle acts way more, what I would say would be natural for her. And so in this case, Noelle and Kris can be very open and honest with each other. Now, we learned that Kris has definitely been a prankster towards Noelle, and she hasn't always really enjoyed that, which is kind of interesting because of what she tells Susie about liking to be scared. And if anything, Kris has preyed on those fears, which once again brings me to how healthy really is this relationship. Of course, good friends can always be teasing. You gotta spend some time around Nathan and Camille just to see how much best friends tease each other. But that aside, there is a difference between teasing for the fun of it and teasing maliciously. And at least from Noelle's point of view, and I'll get into this a little bit later, it seems as though it is more malicious as far as her perception goes. But for Kris, the important thing is that Noelle is someone that they can reach out to. Noelle represents a better time in Kris's life, a time when Azriel was still around. And not just when Azriel was around, but as we learn that Kris was in this group of friends with Azriel, Des, and Noelle, and that they went on adventures with each other. This was probably a really good time for Kris, and as a result, Noelle represents these happier, better memories. And so, in a way, it's really interesting right here. This is a relationship that I hope gets developed even further as the game progresses, because Noelle is that friend who has helped Kris multiple times with homework, with being prepared in class, and just feeling like they can be a part of something. And then at the same time, Kris has really teased Noelle a whole lot, which Noelle has not liked. And yet at that same time, Kris allows Noelle to be herself. And even when she's around Susie, we have to ask, is she actually being herself? Because it's very clear just how comfortable Noelle is around Kris, even though she is very wary of whatever shenanigans Kris might suddenly pull in an instant. Then we have Kris's relationship with Ralsei. This is an absolutely fascinating one. And you might be wondering, okay, Lars, really, why are you including Ralsei? Because Ralsei is not part of the classroom. Ralsei is not part of the group of kids that is in Kris's waking life. Well, Ralsei is young. Ralsei fits in with the others. When Kris and Susie are talking about what it would be like to bring the Darkners into the world of the Lightners and how Ralsei would just be a part of everything, it's clear that Ralsei really means something to these two. Now then, a lot of people have been getting very wary again of Ralsei, and yet again, this is a rabbit hole that I'm not yet ready to jump down in terms of speculation and theorizing. But even though Kris is at times standoffish to Ralsei, as you play throughout the game, depending on the different options that you choose, Kris has a good relationship with Ralsei. There's definitely some reasons as to why Kris might be holding back from really opening up to Ralsei, and not just because we as the player might choose to put Ralsei more at arm's length, but because, well, Ralsei reminds Kris a lot of a younger Azriel. Now then, as opposed to Noelle, for whom that relationship is a memory of better times, Azriel by himself represents both a good thing and a bad thing for Kris. Azriel was Kris's closest best friend before Susie came along, but also when Azriel left for college, it left a very large gaping hole in Kris's life, in Kris's heart. And Ralsei is not Azriel. As a result, Ralsei cannot fill that hole. So I think that for Kris, this is yet again an evolving relationship right here, where Kris has found someone who needs them, and Kris is more than happy to help out Ralsei, and really has good open conversations with Ralsei. Yet at the same time, I think that Kris is still trying to figure out where Ralsei fits in their life, because even though Ralsei's a friend, Ralsei clearly represents something regarding Azriel. And as such, because Azriel is still something, is an element in Kris's life that needs to be resolved, Ralsei cannot yet take his place in Kris's life as a very good, close friend. And I'm just going to say that is brilliant nuance on the part of the story. To have it where it just seems like Ralsei is Kris's best friend, maybe even more so than Susie because of how much time you spend with Ralsei, and yet, once again, paying close attention to everything that's going on, it seems as though Kris and Ralsei are not at the same level of friendship as Kris seems to be with Susie. Now, that's not to say that Kris doesn't value Ralsei's friendship. In fact, I think that they really do, but it's still, once again, the fact that Ralsei seems to represent something about Azrael, and that is an element in Kris's life that they need to resolve, and until they resolve it, there's a stumbling block of some kind that prevents Kris from truly embracing Ralsei as a close friend in their life. Now then, I realize as I'm talking about all of this right here, there's someone very important I'm forgetting. I'm forgetting Berdley! I guess I'm just like Queen in that way. You can't forget Berdley. So, let's talk about Kris and Berdley right here. This is very easily passed off as a bully dynamic going on right here. And really, that's what it is at face value, and even throughout most of chapters 1 and 2. However, things change as you get further down the road as Berdley opens up to Kris. And once again, we begin to realize that there's a long history between these characters right here, and that they might have always been somewhat standoffish. And that might be because Berdley and Kris are more similar than either of them would actually like to admit. Except in one case, Kris is totally fine to be the prankster and the weirdo and maybe not the smartest kid, whereas Berdley wants to obtain that higher level. He wants to actually be revered, be loved, be regarded, be popular, which is something that Kris hasn't gone for, which might, in a way, actually help lead into all the bullying, because Berdley sees himself in Kris and is just like, well, if you're not going to go for the position I have, I'm going to happily take that. And because you and I share way more in common than I really want to admit, there's always the possibility, because you're so close with Noelle, that you might one day take everything that I have. So Kris, I'm going to put you in your place. Now, as silly and as dumb as that might even sound way more calculating than what a typical teenager might experience. As someone who teaches teenagers, I can tell you, this kind of calculation happens quite a bit. And I still remember back in my time in high school, holy cow, the game to climb the social ladder was a brutal one. And this was definitely something that people actively thought about in order to beat various rivals in trying to be popular. So we can see then where this is coming from right here. Because of their similarities and because Berdley really wants his social status, he is willing to put down Kris. As a result, Kris and Berdley really have an antagonistic relationship throughout most of the game thus far. And Kris, being a prankster, has always played it up more for laughs. I don't think that Kris has ever really held it against Berdley. Berdley would hold it against Kris if the roles were reversed, but not so much the other way around, and that's just because of Kris's core personality. What is really neat right here is that even though we get to see Berdley's redemption mostly through Susie, it's really, really neat to see how ultimately this redemption for Berdley stems through this connection with Kris. So this relationship is a very positive one for Berdley, and in a way it is a positive affirmation of who Kris is. That Kris is not the kind of person who would really become the bully, because it's just not part of their core attitude. Yes, they are the prankster, and yes, they definitely pranked Noelle maybe too far, but there's a difference between being a teasing meanie at worst and then straight up being a bully who is constantly putting someone else down. And not just putting someone else down, but doing it for your own validation. So this is why this particular relationship I feel is a really great one, because it goes from very bad to something that can become really good as Berdley begins to realize, I am not the best thing since sliced cheese, and I really need to clean up my act. And that is in large part thanks to their relationship with Kris. Okay, so now that I haven't forgotten Berdley, well, let's then talk about Catti and Jockington. This right here is really interesting for us to consider because, well, in the game so far, we haven't had many conversations with either of them. Jockington seems to be the beloved child within the classroom. And honestly, if you think back to your time in high school, or if you are in high school, think about it. There's always that one person that everyone just loves. You can't hate them. And if someone hates them, you're just like, dude, what's wrong with you? This person is just wholesome. They're just good, and that's who Jockington is. He's just a good boy. He's just very exuberant, loves what he loves, and wants everyone to love it too. And not in an overbearing way, but in a, hey man, if you ever want to talk about it, if you ever want to be a part of it, I'm here for you. And that's pretty good. This means that Jockington has a very positive relationship with just about everyone. Catti's an interesting character, however, because once again, we get some revelation into the fact that maybe, just maybe, there's a whole lot more going on here than we thought. That Kris and Catti have actually a long-standing relationship in the back. And when I say that, I mean that they've had lots of conversations. They probably have also gone out on their own little expeditions, going into things about the occult, maybe even about the dark world, though Catti probably doesn't fully understand that. In any case, they share an understanding of the macabre, of the morbid, of the mysterious, of the dangerous. What this means right here is that Kris and Catti actually have a lot in common. However, Kris is a more adventurous character, and because Kris is a prankster, it means that there's an outgoing element to them that Catti doesn't innately have. Catti's fine to be friends with people, but Catti's not going to go out of her way to truly interact with others, which means that these two who have a whole lot that could easily make them best friends aren't going to be best friends because the initiative isn't there on both of their parts. And this has led to Catti hanging out in the back, so to say, and Kris going off and doing their own thing. So it's an interesting relationship because it's one where you could very easily see these two actually becoming fast and maybe even best friends, but their core personalities don't lend themselves to becoming fast friends. This is something that honestly is, once again, just really, really brilliant. And when you think about it, that could happen to anyone out there. They could get along really well with any given person, but maybe not be best friends with them because, well, their personalities might complement each other, but they don't mesh entirely. By now, you're probably glancing down at the time counter. You're like, holy cow, Lars was right. This is going to be a long one. Whew, good thing he's not talking about everyone in hometown. See, I'm doing you a favor. Let's jump on to Susie right here. So Susie is quite easily the real protagonist of all of Deltarune. She's the character who's going through the most transformation throughout the game thus far, because she is the one who's truly the outsider and is doing what Toby said he wanted us as the players to do, become friends with everyone. Susie is learning all about friendship. And I love this. So when we first look at Susie and Kris, Susie wouldn't even really notice the fact that Kris is interested in her, either because they are interested in becoming romantic with Susie or because they recognize a kindred spirit within Susie. When Susie goes to basically attack Kris at the beginning of chapter 1, Kris doesn't want a conflict. That's because Kris just genuinely actually wants to talk with Susie. Now then, Kris is scared, and rightfully so, but there's a persistence to Kris that Susie picks up on later on in the story that's like, wow, this person is willing to go out of their way to help me, especially during the fight with King. And that is that moment that really solidifies it to Susie that Kris isn't just lip servicing her. Kris is willing to act on her behalf. And that's one of those things that opens her up to realizing, wow, really anyone can be my friend. Now, honestly, for Susie's part, her experience with becoming friends with people actually begins with Lancer. Lancer is her Darkner, the one who helps open her up to the possibility of friendships. He is her first friend. Kris is the person who then steps in to eventually become her best friend. And that is something that will happen by the end of the game. They're just beginning right here, but all of the building blocks are there. We see it with Susie's exuberance and how even if she can't have the dark world, she wants to be friends still with Kris. She wants that. Now then, on the topic of romance, since it's already been brought up, and trust me, almost with most of these relationships right here that I'm going to talk about Susie, there's a lot of underlying romance right here. There is the possibility that Susie harbors her own crush for Kris. This comes down to the way that she reacts to Kris sharing moss with her, also the way that she reacts to Kris wanting a hug from her, even though she brushes it off and everything. When you look at her facial expressions, you can tell that she's willing to do it if that's something that Kris absolutely needs. But even more so, there's this weird little bit right here that I'm going to get into this later, not in this video, but in another video where it seems as though Susie's implying that she might want to kiss Kris. I'm going to get more into that eventually. Consider that just a little teaser for the future. In any case, at the very least, Kris is a very important friend now to Susie, who is opening up all different kinds of possibilities for future friendships with other people. Kris is someone that she shares very powerful secrets with. Kris is someone that Susie can be extremely open with. As a result, everything is there for Susie and Kris to become, at the very least, best friends. Now, let's look at Susie and Noelle. Oh boy, if chapter 1 wasn't telegraphing where this is going, chapter 2 just basically hits you over the head with a 2x4, that Noelle is in love with Susie. Now then, for Susie's part, there is definitely the potential that she is developing feelings for Noelle, especially with all of the ride that they share on the Ferris wheel, and how she reacts to Noelle in the world of the Lightners bringing up her tail, and everything like that. Super cute, super funny. But for Susie, all of this is very, very new, and she was willing to become friends with Noelle if Noelle wished, ever since Noelle was one of the first people to show her kindness in the classroom. So for Susie, Noelle is someone who is important, and Susie would like to get to know Noelle way better. And this is really, really well played out at the end of chapter 2, where Susie wants to potentially invite Noelle to go to the fair, to go to this carnival and hang out. Why? Well, because Susie wants to get to know Noelle better. After realizing that there was so much to get to know about Kris and how much fun it is with Kris, and getting just a taste of that with Noelle, Susie wants more. Susie is beginning to open up beyond just Ralsei, Lancer, and Kris. She's beginning to open up to other people, and Noelle is that person who she's ready to start opening up to and being honest and start her next big friendship with. And that's really, really cool. Next, we get to Berdley. And with this right here, this is more just straight up antagonism. Whereas Berdley and Kris have a very unique bully dynamic between each other. In this case, both Berdley and Susie just do not like each other. Until as Berdley just comes to wake up to his senses that he's been an idiot this whole time, well, suddenly Susie starts looking far more attractive. Now then, I don't really think that he was harboring a crush on Susie before this, and she definitely doesn't have any feelings for him, at least at this point within the story. But man, she's already raking up those harem members, woo, with Kris, Noelle, and Berdley thus far. Oh boy. But for Susie, Berdley is just, he represents what people can be, where they get, and what I mean by that is that they can be really mean and cruel for petty, stupid reasons. But at the same time, they can also rise to the occasion and become good people. If anything, Berdley should represent to Susie that everyone in the class can change and that their disposition towards her can become positive. And that's a very important part of the relationship between Susie and Berdley. Then we get to Susie and Ralsei. This relationship is another fun one, and yet again, another one of those relationships where, tick, there's another member in Susie's harem. Ralsei and Susie share such an interesting relationship with each other because Susie was an absolute bully and menace to Ralsei in the first chapter, and even all the way up through until almost the end, except for like where Susie realizes that she doesn't want to go back to the world of the Lightners without saying goodbye to everyone, and that Ralsei is one of those people, and that Ralsei really is, he's a good boy. He's Susie might not always agree with Ralsei, but by the end she can come to accept that this person is my friend, in part because of all the things they've done for me, for the good that they see in me, but also because I can see all of the fun and good in them, and that I want that, and that Susie is willing to change herself, and not for Ralsei, which is very important. She's not changing herself for Ralsei, but she's willing to change so that way she can have someone like Ralsei in her life, and that shows immense character growth, and we get to see that growth play out throughout chapter 2 as she has just fun ribbing sessions with Ralsei, teaches Ralsei sarcasm, and how Ralsei in turn learns a lot from her about what it means to be a good friend and to accept people for who they are, but also encouraging people to still be their best selves. There's so much there, and you could easily have a half an hour long discussion on just their relationship alone, and how it's so precious that they spend more time with each other and actually have good, healthy conversations throughout chapter 2. It shows that their relationship is progressing and becoming stronger. Now then, Susie with Jockington and Catti. Susie, I bet, was just either trying to be a part of that welcoming that Jockington has for everyone. Come on, just be a part of my awesome life, man. And that Susie was like, well, you're inviting me in, but you don't seem to be like the coolest kind of guy on out there. And Catti did not take well to that. And now there's real animosity between Susie and Catti. This is going to be really interesting to see play out in later chapters, because since Berdley is the person who can show to Susie that no matter who you are, there's a chance for change, Catti is going to be the one to challenge that, and that's going to be the person that Susie is really going to have to win over. Not because, hey, it's just I need you to be a friend or I need another person in my harem, but rather because there is real animosity between the two of them. Susie does not want to be around Catti, and Catti does not want to be around Susie. So we're going to have to see how these two can put that animosity to the side, because once again, Deltarune is about forming the friendships with everyone in this world. And that is what Susie is going to have to confront. Can she become friends with someone who she legitimately sees as an enemy? Alright, so now let's jump on over to Noelle. Whew, I've already touched on a lot with Noelle, but let's start diving in here a little bit deeper. From Noelle's perspective, as far as we can understand it, Noelle cares about Kris. It's one of the reasons why there's a lot of shipping art for Kris and Noelle, and why that ship is still going strong, because she genuinely does care. And that is something that you really have to give her, no matter how you think of her character or how over the top she is around certain people. Noelle genuinely does care, and that's something that is really great to have as a personality trait for her. As a result, she's willing to put up with Kris and really try to help Kris out. And I think that she genuinely does care for Kris's well-being, and that she wants Kris to be their best selves. She wants Kris to be happy. She wants Kris to be included. And yet at the same time, there's a lot about Kris that scares her. Snowgrave route aside, there's a lot to say about how Noelle is very wary of Kris. And if anything, I'd probably say that Kris is willing to bury any hatchet from the past, but Noelle isn't ready to move on just yet. Noelle is dealing with a whole ton of baggage. We don't really know what's happened with Des, and sure, she might be dead, or there might be something else that went down. We just don't know. There's a whole lot of speculation on that front. In any case, so Noelle is dealing with whatever happened with her sister Des. She's dealing with her father potentially dying. She's dealing with the fact that her mother is so distant and so cold. She's dealing with the fact that everyone also wants her to kind of be this perfect girl. Everyone's put her up onto a pedestal, and she can't really be herself. Around Kris, she can be herself. And who that person is someone who is kind, brilliant, someone who wants to push things forward. She wants to move forward with her life. And those are all things that Kris brings out within Noelle, even if their relationship is not the most healthy. All right, now let's talk Noelle and Susie for a moment. I said previously that I'm not entirely certain how honest or herself Noelle is really being with Susie. And my reasoning for this is coming back to how we see how open Noelle is with Kris, and that Noelle can be herself around them. When Noelle is with Susie, she opens up about how she actually really likes scary things. She likes being scared. She likes overcoming that fear. She likes facing it. And that probably comes back to something about Noelle that we're still discovering about her. Could be something from what it was like to be a kid, maybe Kris's pranks, maybe what happened to them in the woods. Who exactly knows? But in any case, Noelle opens up to Susie and everything like that, and I totally get it. She's scared because she's around her crush. We've all been there. She's feeling super flustered and everything like that. But at the same time, however, we saw how being around Kris helped to bring out Noelle's intelligence, Noelle's desire to prove herself, to overcome things, to continue to advance. And with Susie, sure, we can chalk it up to the fact that Susie is her crush and everything like that, and to have this chance to speak with her one-on-one, it's her dream and everything like that, that she's not going to be 100% herself. We can get that. However, still throughout the game, with the exception for when she helps out with one of the mouse traps later on, Noelle still really isn't quite herself. She's intelligent. She knows how to solve problems and everything like that, but she doesn't open up. She doesn't open up around Ralsei. She ceases to open up around Kris. And I think it honestly comes down to the fact that she's trying to figure out who to be around Susie. Now then, once again, this comes back to some of the things that we already see with some of the other characters. With Berdley changing himself or acting a certain way to attain his goal. Susie realizing that she should change in order to have people like Ralsei in her life. And then we have Noelle trying to figure out who she should be in order to have Susie in her life. Now then, it's such an interesting topic because ultimately, in a very healthy situation, if you change anything about yourself, it's because you realize that you need to change for the better. Not because you want to have someone in your life. Sometimes a person can motivate you and inspire you to be better, and that's really good, but it has to honestly come from yourself. So right here we see that Noelle is honestly giving it a good try, but she's not truly being herself. It feels like there's something missing. She is exuberant, flustered, and while she is being open, she's not being open the way that she is around Kris. Now, those are all things that can change as the story progresses. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning of this particular relationship that can swing either towards friendship or towards romance. We're going to have to see how the game plays out from here. But I would not say that Noelle is yet at the point where she can be the kind of friend that she should be for Susie. Now then, this is not me trying to bash on this particular ship or bash on the character of Noelle. This is honestly me saying In order for these characters to get along well, in order for them to really become friends, there's still a lot of ground to cover. Just as Kris and Susie's relationship is still evolving, Susie and Ralsei's relationship is still evolving, this is just the first step towards Susie and Noelle becoming friends, potentially becoming more. We'll just have to see how it goes. And for Noelle, this is an opportunity for her to honestly decide who she needs to be. And not just for Susie to be in her life, but for her to really be her best self. And that is something that is, once again, incredibly nuanced, incredibly cool, and I really like that Toby Fox is hinting at this with this particular character. I really enjoy that. Now that when we look at Noelle and Berdley, this relationship is such an interesting one right here. And this is, again, where I have to step back a moment and wonder how much is Noelle really giving away of herself, like in this particular situation? How honest is she being? How open is she actually being? She's incredibly friendly towards Berdley. She is incredibly suffering towards Berdley. She is way too patient with this little bluebird right here in so many circumstances. She honestly wishes the best for Berdley, and she wants Berdley to succeed. She understands that he's putting on a show and everything like that. And that is, once again, very considerate of her, but is it really the best thing to do? And what we see right here is we see that the relationship between Noelle and Berdley is one of absolute miscommunication, and that's not healthy really in any kind of way. This miscommunication leads to her actually throttling Berdley later on down the line, which was really hilarious, but I mean, once again, it's really not anything good, and this hints at still things that Noelle needs to work out for herself. We then get to Noelle's relationship with Ralsei. This is such an interesting one right here. Ralsei is the Darkner companion ultimately to Kris, but also in many ways to Susie. Ralsei is the Darkner whose duty it is to help these Lighteners become their best selves. When it comes to Noelle, that is something that Ralsei isn't really able to do, and that is in part because Noelle has no idea what she should make of Ralsei. And to be very fair, Ralsei already has his paws full of Kris and Susie. But another thing that's really interesting is that Noelle doesn't really get hung up on the very obvious connection between Ralsei and Azrael. Now, maybe Kris sees it better that way because Azrael is Kris's older brother, but you would think that for someone who was around Azrael Dreamer so often, apparently, as a younger kid, that she would be able to make the connection. And while there's definitely a sense of recognition there, Noelle never really dives very far into it. This comes about because of her obsession with Susie. As a result of doing that, Noelle misses out on a very crucial opportunity to make connections with other people who are very important. Whether or not you think that Ralsei is up to something shady right here, and once again, I'm not going to be getting into that in this particular video, Ralsei is a character who actively seeks what is best for the Lighteners. And Ralsei steps in to save Noelle and Berdley from doing something incredibly stupid by opening up a third dark fountain, which would help to bring on the Howling. He is very firm, and he tells Noelle in no uncertain circumstances what this particular choice of hers would bring about. This is the wake-up call that Noelle really needs in her life. Ralsei's the kind of person who would help steer Noelle in the right direction. However, because Noelle is so preoccupied with the other relationships that she has in her life and trying to balance them out and become the person that she wants to be versus the person who other people like her mother might want her to be, well, that means that she is missing out on really great friendships with someone like Ralsei. And that is, once again, a fantastic nuance with these characters right here, because that's something that, once again, is very applicable to real life. How many people have opportunities to be friends with some really amazing people, and in the end, never have that relationship because they're too preoccupied with other things that are happening in their life, even justifiably so. But then they miss out on a fantastic opportunity. Maybe years later, they reconnect and they're like, oh my gosh, why didn't we become friends sooner? I've seen that happen so many times, especially with people who I actually went to high school with. It's like we kind of knew each other, and then years later you meet up again and you find out just like how much in common you had, how many things you could talk about with each other. And you're like, holy crud, we were in the same class, or we always passed by each other. How the heck did we never, how did we never figure this out? And that's because you were too preoccupied at the time. I think that's what's happening here with Noelle and Ralsei, and that's a very, very interesting relationship dynamic. Now, coming to Noelle, Catti, and Jockington. Wow, here's a really, really interesting one right here. So Noelle is on the track team with Jockington, which is kind of funny to think about considering who Jockington is. And there are people who speculate that maybe Noelle's mother's the one who pushed her onto this. I would actually say that more likely than not, it's that Noelle is just all like, she got sucked into the charisma that is Jockington. Jockington is all about, I'm friends with everyone. Everyone come on in. Experience the coolness that is my life because I love you guys. So Noelle gets sucked on into that and found herself probably just becoming a part of the team, working with Jockington, and it's not even anything that she actually wants to do, but because she's always trying to please others and everything like that, she's in a relationship that's probably fine, but not necessarily one that she wants to really commit to. And that's, once again, very fascinating to consider right here, and that's probably something that we're going to see very soon down the road. And with Catti, this is a very interesting one right here, and I've been having conversations with people online about, well, what's going on here with Catti, especially with her cryptic warning for Kris to save Noelle from Susie. There's a very real possibility that Catti has a crush on Noelle. It could be there. Yeah, I could see it. But another thing, though, is that it's very clear that Catti is very observant of what's happening right here. Catti doesn't like Susie. Catti notices very well just how much Noelle likes Susie. She reads the flustering and the everything like that. And so because Catti probably doesn't like Susie, Catti wants to make sure to wreck that particular budding friendship, nip it in the bud before it grows any. This is a really, really interesting one right here because we know so little about the dynamic between Catti and Noelle. Could Catti have a crush on Noelle? Could Catti be hurting Susie through Noelle? Is Catti actually a good friend to Noelle and is really concerned about what Susie might do to Noelle? We don't really know. Catti is a fascinating character who I'm really looking forward to getting to know more about because of how much she has already observed and how much she already knows without actually knowing the full story. This right here is, again, a very, very interesting, complicated relationship that we see with Noelle, that she's friends with someone who you don't really know what that person's motivations are or how much they actually know. And this is a very interesting kind of friendship to see. And it's, again, one that I have seen quite often in my own life, where you have people who are friends with so many other people who seem to know all these different things that are going on and yet don't really know why they're friends with everyone. Is it because they're gathering dirt on people? I've definitely seen that. Is it because they want to be loved by everyone? I've definitely seen that. Is it that someone is harboring a crush and is trying to get in good with someone else? I have definitely seen that. So who actually knows what this relationship is between Catti and Noelle? And it's one that will definitely be explored as we go into the later chapters. Now, let's talk about Ralsei. So, Ralsei and Kris. This right here is such a fascinating dynamic right here. I've already talked about how Kris definitely is held back from truly opening up to Ralsei, whereas Ralsei, on the other hand, it wants to be an open book. Ralsei wants to talk about everything and anything. Ralsei is a character who wears his heart on his sleeve, and I love him for it. And it's clear just how much Ralsei wants to please and help out the other characters. As a Darkner, it is his duty to help Kris and Susie become their best selves. And that is incredibly admirable. That is a great thing to do as a friend. However, what we definitely see right here is that it's not the perfect friendship dynamic, at least not yet, because Ralsei is a person who is giving, but he's not exactly taking much either. And in any good relationship, there must be give and take. And so while this is a relationship that has a lot of good going for it, it can become better if Ralsei starts really asking Kris, and later on also as well Susie, to really reciprocate this, which Ralsei has actually already done for Susie. So I want to focus in on that right here, because this is actually something that is really interesting. Ralsei stood up for himself in chapter 1 to Susie, asking that Susie not make fun of him anymore and that he would then be willing to make a cake for her. Sure enough, in chapter 2, he makes cakes for her, and you can just continuously eat cake. And Susie loves it. And Ralsei is willing to do all these great things for Susie, and Susie adores what Ralsei has done and very obviously lavishes praise and is cool and everything like that. Susie helps Ralsei learn how to act, and Susie is the one who carts off Ralsei to go to the fair and just enjoy each other's time together. Like, that is a very big thing to do as a friend, especially for someone who doesn't really understand what friendship is. Susie now actually takes the lead and is showing Ralsei how to actually be a better friend and really be open and learn from each other. That is incredible progress right there. Ralsei is actually becoming a better character because of his relationship with Susie. He hasn't yet reached that point with Kris. So again, there is absolutely fantastic nuance with all of this right here. And really at this point, we should be able to clearly say that, yeah, there actually is no relationship in this game that is absolutely perfect. And in many cases, that's because we're only in chapter 2. It's only the beginning. Things are just getting started. And so what we see right here is we see where these relationships right now stand at the beginning, and we can get an idea of where they might go. Because your choices do matter within the game, you can either build very healthy relationships or you can erode those friendships through the wrong choices. Or maybe through the right choices. It all depends on the point of view that you have. But as Toby Fox has said, and I've reiterated this many times, the goal is to become friends with everyone. And so if you're actually going to fulfill his vision for the game, that is kind of the way that you should play. And so what we really want to then see is we want to see where these relationships go. Now, if you decide not to go that route and you want to go Snowgrave route, you want to go weird route, fine, because once again, your choices actually do matter within this game, and you will receive the appropriate ending and appropriate awesomeness based upon your choices. And that's one of the things that Toby Fox does very, very well as a game developer and as a storyteller. So now let's finally get to Catti and Jockington. I've already talked a lot about these two right here from how they interact with the other characters. Catti loves Jockington because he's a good boy. Jockington loves everyone, and so it seems pretty cut and dry. But we can be assured that they will be the focus of an upcoming chapter very soon. Maybe not chapter 3, because chapter 3 seems like it's going to be very dreamer-centric. We're going to dive into the backstory of what happened to Kris's family. I'm pretty certain that's going to be what chapter 3 is about. Catti and Jockington might become a part of that, but I don't know if they will be center to chapter 3. Probably more likely chapter 4. Now, I say this because when you are in Queen's Palace, you get to see that there are 2 rooms for Catti and Jockington, who really haven't played much of a role in the game up until this particular point. And then afterwards, as you go around hometown with Susie and you're doing your exploring, you then get to meet Jockington over at QC's Diner, and you get to have an interesting conversation with Catti, similar to what you can have with Noelle, where there's tons of different options, a lot of things that you can learn from Catti, and that's where you begin to realize that Catti and Kris definitely have a longer reaching relationship, and that Catti is very interested in what is going on, and that she knows more than it might seem on the surface. Now, the reason why these two characters are going to be very important is because of how they stand in opposition to Susie. Susie and Jockington have a misunderstanding. That's going to have to be cleared up. But Susie and Catti are definitely antagonistic towards each other. And whereas Susie has had this very strong feeling of how, like, you have enemies versus people who can become your friends, this is an evolving idea for her, because back in the beginning of chapter 1, enemies were enemies. And then, come to find out, some enemies can indeed become your friends. And mercy is the better way to go. And Susie just loves the fact that there's all these people that she can be friends with. But still, there are certain enemies who, well, they are enemies. And the people who fall definitely into that category so far would be King, especially so, and deservedly so, Jevil, and Spampton. All the other villains, to some degree or another, have been redeemed for Susie and are either now friends or potential friends for her. This has set a pattern for what she can expect moving forward with Jockington and Catti. Will she be willing to overcome these antagonistic relationships, get to know these two people within her class, and actually become friends with them? That is Susie's journey moving forward in the game. And because Susie really is, in many ways, the protagonist of this story, not just one of them. I mean, she is one of them. We have our three heroes, Kris, Susie, and Ralsei, but really Susie's the one who is going through the most marked development and is really the one who is growing into becoming the hero and being the one who can befriend and will befriend everyone in the class. And so this is the next crucial step in her journey as a hero. Now, there are still other relationships within the class that should be addressed, but this video is already going on pretty long, and we don't have many details right now for what can be said about the other people in class and also throughout hometown. But here's the thing, is that the seeds are being planted for way more interactions down the line. As I said earlier, Toby Fox is brilliant when it comes to characterization and linking all of these different characters through complex relationships. This is something that is really, really good. Now then, what can we learn as writers from all of this? I've done a massive analysis right here, and we're just scratching the surface. We can go so deep on every single one of these relationships, and there's still more to come. Holy cow! But what can we then learn as writers from all of this? What I would argue is this. This is the most important thing that we can really take away from Deltarune as writers, at least in this particular instance where we're looking at relationships. Each one of these relationships is unique. And that's important because individuals are just that. They are unique. They are different from each other. It's what makes them an individual. They are one of a kind. And believe it or not, every person out there in the world is a one-of-a-kind character. Sure, a lot of people can be very similar to each other, but each person is their own. And because that is the case, you will always have a different relationship with each individual person in your life. As a writer, when you are writing the interactions between all of your different characters and writing all of these different relationships, you need to bear that in mind. No two relationships in your book should feel exactly the same. Now, I will put a caveat onto that right there. It should be that way if these characters really mean something to the story. So if they constantly crop up again and again and again and are interacting with your protagonist, then they should have a very unique relationship with them. they, like, whatever it be, if it can be a very healthy friendship, a very complicated friendship, a very unhealthy friendship, a very odd friendship, a friendship where you're not exactly sure where people stand, everything like that. And when I think about a lot of the stories that I really, really enjoy, like I think of, for instance, like I'll just look at the hobbits from the Lord of the Rings. I mean, there's so many different examples I could draw from, but I think about like the hobbits from the Lord of the Rings, how Frodo is actually really, really good friends with Merry. In fact, at one point it's described that Meriadoc is Frodo's best friend. And then Frodo just enjoys having Pippin around. It's just like, you're so funny, I just love you, man. I'm going to keep you around. And Frodo likes having Sam around, but there's a lot of respect between Frodo and Sam. It's way more respectful than really joking. With Pippin, Frodo jokes all the time in the books. With Merry, Frodo is very much relaxed and open. With Sam almost has this hero worship of Mr. Frodo. And Sam is very kind, but also somewhat reserved towards Merry and Pippin. Merry and Pippin are just joking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Merry is kind of short with Sam, and Merry is very honest with Frodo. And then Pippin just likes to have a lot of fun with everyone else, but Pippin also always is about kind of comparing himself to other people within the book, which is a really interesting dynamic to see, and how he always wants to try to live up to what he thinks the other three are. Frodo is just this amazing, wise leader, and Sam is just so good and noble, and Merry is just the hero, and I should be like that. So even within this tightly knit group of 4 friends, well, there are different dynamics between the 4 of them that help to define their close-knit friendship, but also help to define the character arcs that they are going to go on, and how they constantly interact with each other, and how they think of each other. This is something that Deltarune does, this is something that Lord of the Rings does, this is something that so many great books with fantastic characters do. So, as a writer, what you need to do is this. You need to really understand the personalities of your characters and see how they mesh together, and really come to define that relationship through their interactions. And not all relationships need to necessarily be healthy ones. Not all relationships need exactly be friendly ones. But neither should it be where it's like, oh, they're angsty, edgy, and I hold people at bay. That's a trope from edgy anime that really just grates on a lot of people's nerves and loses its savor very, very quickly. Also, if you have a loner character, well, loner characters still actually have really interesting interactions with different people, once again, because of how different personalities click. And that is something that, once again, you really want to bring out. So whether a character is very charismatic, not charismatic at all, withdrawn, has their heart on their sleeve, just loves the world, loves everyone, whatever it be, you need to understand these personalities and how these personalities mesh. And it will take work. It's not exactly something that is formulaic. This is honestly where garden writers will really excel, exploring how these characters mix and mingle. For the architect writers out there, well, you guys are going to have to learn how to really experiment with these characters and let them live and have a life of their own. And remember, the goal is to have different relationships between different people. And if those relationships are fun, unique, interesting in their own way, those are the things that gravitate your audience towards specific characters and specific character interactions, which gets them more invested in their stories and more invested in the story overall, which just heightens their enjoyment of everything. And once again, this is one of the things that makes Deltarune very fun to play, is just how many interactions there are and how varied they are between all of the different characters, because Toby Fox spent his time creating varied, interesting characters. And that is what we have to do as writers for our own stories. So, all that being said, thank you for sticking around for all of this. I know it's quite a bit, but there's honestly so much to say, and it's a very important thing to say, especially for people who are trying to better understand what's happening within a story and also what we can do to make our own stories more interesting. It is about the characters. Our stories live or die by the characters that we write. And what brings those characters to life is not their own individual traits, but how they interact with each other. That is key. So, with all of that being said, if you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos here on YouTube. Especially go check out our podcast episodes found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We also have wonderful writing advice and challenges for you to try out over at our Pinterest page, and we would love to have you join us over at our subreddit and at our Discord. Links for all of those sites are in the description below, and if you would please help us out with sharing, liking this video. Also, you can check out my books, Bleed, Steam, and Steel, or Knights of Halley Cruise. Those books are also down in the description below. Please go check them out. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.